Ladies and gentlemen, it is another HIAC Talk Radio, Craig and Dan's Wrestling Adventure, WrestleQuest, whatever. We might have a new name soon. I don't know. It all depends on what happens. Got some ideas rolling. The show wouldn't change that much. But yeah, now that we teased the name, and now I'm like, oh, I want to change it. We'll worry about that later. I'm Dan Calachico. With me, as always, as you see, Craig Legons. Hi, Craig. It's going to be a quick one this week. Again, like last week, going to be mostly a wrestling historian. I just wanted to point something out right here. Starting, I think, next week, or the end of next week, maybe beginning of October, really. This is the weekly lineup minus Sunday pay-per-views for wrestling on television. Right? So I just want to run this by. You can see on your screen right now the infographic I had Harry add there. Monday nights, of course, Raw. Just announced today on Tuesday nights will be on Access Television. Impact Wrestling got an 8 o'clock Tuesday night. So you got Monday and Tuesday. Impact back on the air there. Wednesday, we have the Wednesday Night War as we know it. NXT and AEW Dynamite. By the way, the official name is now called Dynamite on TNT. So, and Thursday, nothing. Usually, Beyond Wrestling has a weekly show there, Uncharted Territory, which is in its second season. That's on Independent Wrestling Television, IWTV. It used to be called Paramount. So, I mean, technically there's something on. You should check that out. But, of course, Friday night we have SmackDown. Saturday, the big shows. Saturday, you got Women of Wrestling. WOW at 8 o'clock and at 9 o'clock, New Japan Pro Wrestling. You have choices on network television. Well, not network television, on cable television every night of the week right now. And it's something that we haven't had for a long time. So we don't have to talk about, I don't have enough time to watch all this. We can just say, hey, we have choices now. And choices is good. Choice, very simply, cliched now. We've said it 1,000 times. I'll say it again. Craig, competition is good. And here we are.
Here we are, and it seems like we've gone back in the way back machine early, back when there was different wrestling, just one organization, but different wrestling territories to feast and to try out, and different varieties, different types of wrestlers, different types of styles. It harkens back, like I said many times on this very podcast, back to the territory days where you could in one. Now that we have this every single night, it used to be just Saturday afternoon, Saturday morning into Saturday night. Yeah. You can see 8 or 9 different wrestling organizations, go flip the dial and go, because everything was geared towards Saturday afternoon. All the studio wrestling shows that would tape during the week, and they would show them on Saturday afternoon, Saturday mornings. And you have Georgia, Florida, Mid-Atlantic, World Class, AWA, WWF, all on one day. But now we're getting it every single night in prime time. Okay, competing against network shows. That has never been something. I mean, the Monday Night Wars, or when the wrestling was broadcast, was only between 2 companies, WWE and WCW. Now it's WWE, it's AEW, it's NWA, it's Impact, it's
that's right.
New Japan
show. I forgot. Thank you, Craig.
Yeah. So, but all these major wrestling organizations with major league talent with TV deals, something that's killed other contenders, other prospective competition leagues for the WWE. It's what killed ECW. It's what killed Ring of Honor. It's what has killed TNA a couple of times, but a lack of a TV deal. That's what you need to sustain any pro wrestling company, no matter how good the talent is and no matter how many good people you have behind you. There's no TV deal. There's really no point in calling yourself competition or an alternative I know some organizations don't like being called competition, but an alternative to the WWE. But we have that now. We have plenty of alternatives.
Very interesting that you mentioned Ring of Honor and conspicuous by their absence. Ring of Honor. Beginning of the year, they were selling out Madison Square Garden, and now they don't even have a TV show on cable in this lineup. I know they air locally here on ABC, and it's on the DVR. And I have been watching it, and there's not, the product's great. I got friends that are starting out at the Ring of Honor dojo and going on TV. People talk about attendance issue. Everything is having an attendance issue. Mostly everything is having an attendance issue. We talk about the MLB, and I see other fans on Twitter making fun of other fans' attendance as far as MLB is concerned. That whole league is having trouble. Not just one team. The teams league wide is having attendance issues. Wrestling right now, with a few exceptions, like, WWE just showed they can go back to Madison Square Garden on a Raw and sell it out. They'll sell out SummerSlam. They'll sell out WrestleMania. They'll sell out Royal Rumble for now. As long as, the wheels don't come completely off. And I feel you, Craig. I'm very tired as well. But Ring of Honor, and I see, I'm trying to kind of tiptoe through this because I don't mean this in an ironic, derogatory, or negative way. It sucks to see pictures because the thing on Twitter is to take pictures. The point I was trying to make, because I meandered, was people will take pictures of empty seats, and that's funny. Look at the empty seats. It's not funny. Like, you're still talking about people's jobs. You're still talking about payday. You can criticize the people in the staff at WWE, Ring of Honor, Sinclair Television. We're not going to go into that. But the workers, people who are there making the money, that's all you're hurting by being a schmuck on Twitter and pointing out the obvious. Oh, look, they tarped off a section. I mean, they're still making money. You should settle that down. But the one that depresses me is when it was brought up when Impact was the thing, and that attendance started dropping, is the Ring of Honor shows when they're not even drawing 200-300 for TV tapings anymore. That's a good product. And I don't know. I don't even know what's happening there because I haven't been able to read up or catch up on it past the TV show. I really thought they were going to die. I don't know if they're going to make it the end of the year. And I know that's a $1 million network, the Sinclair networks, but that one makes me nervous, Craig. I don't know what even to say about that. To see this lineup, not see Ring of Honor make any sort of announcement, kind of has me worried.
It does for me too, Dan, because Ring of Honor actually, so many of the stars of these alternative organizations like AEW and Impact, and even NXT got their start in Ring of Honor. Ring of Honor spawned more stars than any alternate wrestling organization since ECW, and a lot of wrestlers in the WWE owe their careers to Ring of Honor. So to see them not involved in it is it's a bitter irony to see someone who's spawned an organization that spawned so many great wrestlers and continue to do so. And it's more personal for us since it started in Philly, and we've seen a lot of great matches here in Philly from Ring of Honor, and seeing matches from guys that are selling out or on the main event at WrestleManias and at SummerSlams and started at Ring of Honor, and having Ring of Honor go from, like you said, selling out Madison Square Garden at the beginning of the year to not even having a TV deal now during the greatest era of televised primetime wrestling in the history of professional wrestling is sad.
I hope that changes. I hope they have something in the works before the end of the year or after the year starts, next year starts, to bring that bring that name back up into that list. It was very interesting to see that list. I'm like, oh wow, that's not good.
Yeah.
It could be an oversight, maybe, because they haven't announced anything.
No.
With going off the air with the TV show they have, it's not like that's happening. But yeah, I don't understand why that's not getting more attention. But
Either.
It's exciting anyway. Nevertheless, as you said. With that being said, sir, it's time for you to take us to the time machine that is the wrestling historian.
Children, I want you to gather around the Snapchat as I take you back to yesteryear. Back when titles were called belts. Back when the universe were called fans. And back when sports entertainment was called professional wrestling. We're going to go back to September 20th, the most important date in the history of the wrestling historian, for me personally. Because on this date, September 20th, 1975, was the first time I ever attended a wrestling event.
Wow.
So September 20th, 1975 was and is the greatest date in the history of the wrestling historian. And saying this to you, Daniel, and to all of our great fans here at HIAC Talk Radio WrestleQuest, Dan and Craig Adventure Hour.
That's even better.
Right here in Philadelphia at the beautiful air-conditioned Philadelphia Spectrum, I attended my very first wrestling event. Not only, Daniel, was this the very first wrestling event I ever attended, and not only was it the first time I'd been in the Spectrum when it wasn't for a Sixers game. This, Daniel, fans of HIAC Wrestling Podcast, this was the first wrestling event I ever saw in color.
Oh, yeah, I guess, yeah.
9 years old, and I lived in a house of black and white television. So this was my first wrestling show in color that I'd ever seen.
Wow.
The sounds, the sights, the smells. I got to see Bugsy McGraw, who was the Braun Strowman of his time, bald head, full beard, came to the ring in a poncho against defeat Pete Sanchez. I got to see Waldo Von Erich against Haystacks Calhoun, and first time I'd ever saw Haystacks Calhoun ever after seeing him in the wrestling magazines and seeing him on TV. And Waldo Von Erich had him tied up in the ring ropes, but he didn't tie his arms. He just put them back behind the ropes because he was 600 pounds. He was so big that even if you put his arms behind the ropes, he couldn't move. And Waldo was just wailing on him, and the referee had already lost control. And it seems like Waldo was beating on him for 10 minutes straight, and the fans were booing because obviously Haystacks couldn't fight back. And then all of a sudden, out in the crowd, we saw Ivan Putski run out from the dressing room, and then point to Waldo Von Erich and point to the crowd. We all went nuts. It was the biggest pop of the night, and Ivan Putski ran to the ring and just started beating the crab windmill punches on Waldo Von Erich, who ran out of the ring, and I jumped out of my seat. I could not have been happier to see Ivan Putski, because this is the first time I'd seen him, too. But the main event of this particular show, September 20th, 1975, my very first wrestling match ever, Daniel. The main event was a Sicilian stretcher match.
Oh.
Involving George the Animal Steel going up against the reigning, defending, undisputed Worldwide Wrestling Federation heavyweight champion, Bruno Sammartino. With special guest, and if that wasn't enough, and by God, don't you think it ought to be,
Yeah.
special guest referee Andre the Giant.
Oh my God.
So this is first time I'd ever seen Andre in person, first time I'd ever seen Bruno in person. Again, first time I'd ever seen a wrestling match in color. And this was a Sicilian stretcher match, which meant the only way you could win was the loser had to be carried out on a stretcher. Uh, this was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. The whole thing, the whole evening, the whole night, the whole spectacle, the hearing of uh, Bruno coming out, just the whispers, and then the dull roar, and then the explosion of him running out, jogging out to the ring. And keep in mind, Andre was already there, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was already in awe of Andre. Then here comes this mythical creature named Bruno, who just goes by one name, who I had never seen wrestle, who only appeared on television with the belt to talk about his next opponent. Because back then, kids, world champion never wrestled on television, ever. He would wrestle in your local arenas, and if you weren't there, you just missed it. And there was no internet, there was no dirt sheets, there were wrestling magazines, but they were 6 weeks behind. So if something had happened to Bruno that night, unless you were there, you would not have known it. But what happened to Bruno that night was that he defeated Georgie Animal Steel by stomping on him relentlessly with the stretcher on top of him, and he was carried out with the help of Andre the Giant. And that September 20th, 1975, gentlemen and ladies, was the very first wrestling match I'd ever saw in my life. And here we are. That was my love of wrestling was born on that day. It was already a love, but after that night, it became an all-encompassing lifetime of love. It all started there, September 20th, 1975.
Insane.
On that same day, 400 miles to the south, in a hair versus title match, Ric Flair defeated Wahoo McDaniel for his first Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Championship. The Mid-Atlantic belt that would become synonymous with Ric Flair at the beginning of his career. He would hold the Mid-Atlantic title 6 times, but he won his first by defeating Wahoo McDaniel, putting his hair on the line. And Ric Flair defeated Wahoo for his first Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Championship. That same date, September 20th, 1983, in Louisville Gardens. This card was part of Jim Cornette's book, Tuesday Night at the Gardens at Louisville. On this particular card, you had the Rock and Roll Express competed. Dennis Condrey went up against Dutch Mantell. Bobby Eaton and Bill Dundee went up against the Assassins. Stan Hansen went up against Austin Idol.
Wow.
And in the battle of the two of the greatest heel announcers in WWE history, Jesse Ventura defeated Jerry Lawler.
Oh, wow.
In Louisville. That was 1983. But on that same card, you had Stan Hansen, Jerry Lawler, Jesse Ventura, the Rock and Roll Express, and members of the original Midnight Express before they were a tag team. All on that one card. You're going to sense a theme on this date, Dan, because on that same day, September 20th, 1984, in a little-known feud, a feud that gets swept under the rug, but it was really a defining moment. In the latter stages of 1984, Tully Blanchard had started wrestling in the NWA, and he convinced Wahoo McDaniel to turn heel. You remember I had said Ric Flair defeated Wahoo McDaniel. Well, Ric Flair was the NWA Heavyweight Champion in 1984, and he'd come to Mid-Atlantic to face the United States Champion. That turned out to be Wahoo McDaniel. And Tully Blanchard wanted a shot, and he attacked Ric Flair. And Wahoo McDaniel, who up until that time had been Ric Flair's friend, did not help Ric Flair out. So Tully Blanchard attacked Ric Flair, ripped off his suit, and Wahoo McDaniel just stood there. Flair said, "Why did you help me?" He said, "You got into that one all by yourself." And what happened was a feud between Ric Flair and Tully Blanchard. And at times, Wahoo McDaniel would team up with Tully Blanchard to go up against Ric Flair and a partner of his choosing. Well, on this particular night, September 20th, 1984, the United States champion, Wahoo McDaniel, the NWA TV champion, Tully Blanchard, would team up to face the NWA heavyweight champion, Ric Flair, and his partner, Dusty Rhodes. And it was during this time, September or this late fall of '84, where in his feud against Wahoo McDaniel and Tully Blanchard, who were both heels, Ric Flair would team up with not only Dusty Rhodes, but Ricky Steamboat to face off against Wahoo McDaniel and Tully Blanchard. Now, this was 8 months before the Horsemen, but Ric Flair and Tully Blanchard had quite a feud going when Wahoo McDaniel turned heel, and Ric Flair would team up with Dusty Rhodes and Ricky Steamboat in different towns throughout the Mid-Atlantic to go against Dusty Rhodes and Tully Blanchard, to go against Wahoo McDaniel and Tully Blanchard. And that feud kind of gets swept under the rug. Not only Ric Flair feuding with Tully Blanchard, but Ric Flair teaming up with both Dusty Rhodes and Ricky Steamboat, two of his most popular and his most arch enemies. But they were a tag team during the latter part of 1984. 1985, the same date, Dan, September 20th. It's a huge date in wrestling history. In the Nassau Coliseum in the WWF, a landmark achievement. Lou Albano would defeat Freddie Blassie in a steel cage match. 52-year-old at the time, Lou Albano, would defeat the 67-year-old at the time, Freddie Blassie, in a steel cage match. He would tie Freddie Blassie to the cage, and Lou Albano would escape. But that would turn out to be the very last match ever in the career, the illustrious career of Classy Freddie Blassie. And it would end in all places in a Nassau Coliseum in a steel cage match. Freddie Blassie, along with Gorgeous George, Lou Thez, Vern Gagne, would be part of the golden age of wrestling in the 50s. He wrestled on television in front of millions of people back when TV was scarce, and TV wrestling matches, even now, were cheap to go on. So Freddie Blassie was a household name. In fact, appearing on the Dick Van Dyke Show a couple of times, and on the original Regis Philbin Show, and on the Tonight Show. Was also known throughout Japan. Still one of the greatest heels of all time, but his last match ever was September 20th, 1985 in the Nassau Coliseum in a steel cage match against Captain Lou Albano. Staying on that same day, in the same year, so in September 20th, 1985, while Lou Albano was facing Freddie Blassie in his last match ever in St. Louis, and a card in St. Louis, the AWA heavyweight champion Rick Martel would go up against Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin, and the NWA champion Ric Flair would defeat the Missouri State champion Harley Race, the now late great Harley Race, on the same card. Also, 500 miles to the north on the same card in Fort Wayne, Indiana, there would be an AWA NWA card there. Sergeant Slaughter would defeat Bar Zukov, and Larry Zbyszko would defeat child molester Buck Zumhoff. Those two are two AWA matches. And on that same card, Dusty Rhodes, the NWA TV champion, defeated Ivan Koloff, and Magnum TA and Tully Blanchard would wrestle for a draw in the United States Heavyweight Championship. So
was that a gimmick, or was that a?
No, Buck Zumhoff is in jail.
Yeah, no, I was trying to be a smart ass.
Yeah, back then he was rock and roll. Buck rock and roll Zumhoff.
Oh, he certainly was.
Rocking and rolling. But back then, on the same day, one in St. Louis and in Fort Wayne, Indiana, you had the AWA and the NWA sharing wrestlers all on the same card.
Crazy, man.
Yes, crazy. But that was back in the day when you could do stuff like that.
I've always said that not so much now, but a few years ago when it was real and we were involved, real contentious in the Philly area as far as wrestling companies, that indie wrestling in general, but specifically Philly, would be better served warring less and sharing talent.
Yeah.
Because there's still, obviously there's people who will go to multiple shows in multiple places, but there are people who will only go to certain companies and would want to see workers there, and it would benefit everybody to be less bitchy and fighty with each other and share talent. And it's starting to clear up now where that's more of a possibility, and people aren't running against each other so close to each other. But and I know with contracts it could never ever happen again, but the crazy idea that excuse me, while the WWF or NWA was running that, you know what I mean, if the WWF or one of these companies were running that, one and the other would share talent like that. For example, AWA and NWA is just crazy these days. Like if AEW let Chris Jericho go back to the WWE for a match to do something and then go back, it just would never happen. But can you imagine how many heads would explode if that was a thing again? It'd be crazy. And it was happening 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, and it was nothing, Dan. It's like, why, you can go to a Madison Square Garden card back in the day and, you'd be waiting for WWF talent, and here, Ric Flair would show up, or the Florida Tag Team Champions would be wrestling each other, or one of the Von Erichs would be at Madison Square Garden on the same card that Austin Idol made his debut, just like that. And you can go to St. Louis at any time during the '80s, and you'd see AWA wrestlers and NWA wrestlers. Just sharing the same bill, sharing the same card.
That's crazy.
And you mentioned Philly would be was a prime example of that, because wrestlers from both companies would come wrestle in Philly, and when they would it'd still be on the bound to NWA, would still wrestle in Philly. Case in point, thank you for that segue. September 21st, 1991. Right here in Philadelphia, the last card ever at the Civic Center, and was the last one for the Joel Goodhart's Tri-State Wrestling Alliance.
There you go. Perfect example.
Perfect example. On this particular card, September 21st, 1991, Kevin Sullivan would take on Terry Funk in a double disqualification.
Wow.
Owen Hart, making his Philadelphia East Coast debut, wrestled from New Japan, and Takayuki Iizuka. But this was a wrestler that Joel Goodhart flew in on his own dime, just to give it to the fans. Check out this mixed tag team match. Eddie Gilbert and his then wife Medusa took on Cactus Jack and Luna Vachon. And the main event was a steel cage match, Abdullah the Butcher versus the original Sheik.
That's insane. I would either love to get Joel back on or unearth the old interviews that we did, like 2 or 3 interviews with Joel when this podcast first started, to hear the stories of how he put that together. And I understand, you probably listen to a lot of these. There's Jim Cornette plays the tapes for the radio interviews, and a lot of it to do with Philly and the Northeast. And to hear the stories on how he would get guys from different companies and get around certain hangups and how he would handle. It's just insane that he had the wherewithal, and he was feeling that this is I don't know, he's not a nobody. Joel Goodhart is a somebody. He is a name in wrestling, especially in the Northeast. If you haven't heard the name Joel Goodhart, do yourself a service and look up the man. And talking to him is everything's a story. It's crazy. He never stops, and I mean that in a good way. Joel Goodhart is Joel Goodhart. But to hear the undertakings that he did to get these wrestlers on the cards and the amount of people that were going to the shows when WCW/NWA and WWF were running those towns almost exclusively at that point, and the attendance is just mind-boggling. You know, it's just they can squeak through sometimes. You never know.
Yeah, I remember one particular show. He had Austin Idol and Jerry Lawler on the show, and Jerry Lawler was taking on Terry Funk, and out to help Terry Funk. It comes Dory Funk Jr. The first time I've ever seen Dory Funk in my life, and he's in Philadelphia, unannounced, to help out his brother. That same card, Iceman King Parsons, still working for World Class.
Wow.
Comes out. He came out to Ice Baby. That was his entrance music. But Austin Idol and Jerry Lawler in the same ring together. I only saw them in wrestling magazines. Never saw either one of them in person ever, and I never thought I would, because Austin Idol, as we know, doesn't travel and certainly doesn't wrestle outside of Tennessee or Georgia. But yeah, and there's a good reason for that. But here he is in Philly, right in front of me at the Civic Center. I couldn't believe it. And at the expense of Joel Goodhart, played, he's out of his own pocket, and got these guys that Jim Cornette, that you mentioned earlier, managed the Fabulous Ones against the Blackhearts.
Yep.
I never thought I'd see that in my life, but September 21st, 1991 was Joe Goodhart's last Tri-State Wrestling Alliance, and one of the last cards held at the old Philadelphia Civic Center, which is no longer there. But yes, hats off to Joe Goodhart.
Real quick, a little anecdote. I used to go to the Civic Center. You say your first show, you know the date. Mine was October 28th, 1989, Halloween Havoc. The Civic Center. But I'd been to the Civic Center for dozens of wrestling shows, and my dad would take me every year to the auto show. The Philadelphia Auto Show used to be on the floor of the Civic Center. And I had not been there since the auto show moved from the Civic Center to the Convention Center when it was built. So was it mid-90s, 96, 97, maybe later?
Yeah.
And I hadn't been there since it was torn down. I didn't go there. That was kind of, oh man, it was sentiment. It was bittersweet for me to see that building go. I can still smell the entrance. Whenever I see pictures I took going there, I'm like, I can still smell that. It didn't occur to me when my dad had a stroke in January. He was at UPenn. As you know, that is right there. And when I would visit him overnight, not overnight, but at night, I would leave around midnight and go walk the block and a half from UPenn to the building to go get my car. And it took me 2 days to realize. The second day, I was sitting there in a Flyers jersey, looking towards where Franklin Field is at the end of that street of Civic Center Boulevard, and looking towards UPenn. I'm sitting there going, oh my God, that's the Civic Center behind me, or what it is now, the hospital building, the children's house. 2 days, and I felt a chill. My God, I haven't sat on the spot in 25 years, and I didn't even realize it was because it's all gone. The only thing that looks the same is the road out front and the little road that goes into the little driveway that you drive around to go back to the exit. Completely different, but it didn't occur to me till that day. I'm like, this was sacred ground for almost over 50 years for wrestling. There's hockey in that building, concerts, Democratic, Republican conventions, but that was a sacred ground for wrestling for almost a century.
It's where Will Chamberlain and the Sixers won their
That's right.
World Championship, 1967,
That's right.
right there. So yes, hallowed ground, um, never to never to be forgotten. Speaking of which, September 21st, 2002, someone will never be forgotten. We lost Ted Petty, Rocco Rock.
Oh,
Um, we lost him September 21st, 2002. Died of a heart attack traveling from one indie show in Jersey City on his way to another indie show right here in Philly at a 3PW show. Um, Ted Petty started his wrestling career late, not until his 30s did he put on a mask and as a Cheetah Kid. And fun fact, for those of you who don't know, um, the very first Monday Night Raw in the Manhattan Center, the dark match was Ted Petty, Rocco Rock, under a mask as the Cheetah, going up against Johnny Rotten. Johnny Rotten would grow out his hair, grow out his beard, put on about 300 pounds, and would change his name to Johnny Grunge. So, the Public Enemy, Rocco Rock and Johnny Grunge, their first match on Monday Night Raw ever was featured Ted Petty and Johnny Rotten. And Public Enemy, of course, would go on to be uh, Paul Heyman's first really big tag team creation. And obviously, Paulie gets a lot of credit for, what he did with the Dudleys and creating Mikey Whipwreck and so many
yeah.
other classic characters. But it was Public Enemy was his first real uh, success story. Um, and Public Enemy matches became spectacles. Come out to Here Comes the Hot Stepper, and even if the rest of the card was kind of down, the Public Enemy would always have the crowd moving, and between tables, ref fighting in the crowd, lots of blood, a Public Enemy match was a spectacle, and it was an event, and it's something that it's very memorable, and it showed the genius of Paul Heyman because the Public Enemy, based on their matches in ECW, there was a bidding war going on between the WWE and WCW to get Public Enemy since they were the most popular team in ECW, hence maybe the most popular team in all of professional wrestling, because you just saw the crowds. WCW won out on the bidding war because they had billionaire Ted's money. So they gave Public Enemy a ton of money to come to WCW, stealing them away from the WWF. Little did they know that Public Enemy was popular in ECW for a reason, because it was ECW. Public Enemy on WCW or even on WWE or any place that's not ECW would fall flat, because Public Enemy, as popular as they were pretty much smoke and mirrors when it came to wrestling a conventional tag team match within a four-sided ring and not outside on a table with chairs and ladders and everything else. But Rocco Rock, Ted Petty, did his best because he was the worker of the team and also the best dancer. But we lost him September 21st, 2002. September 22nd, 1980, going back to what we've been talking about, Dan, with you never know what you're going to get, where different organizations would have an understanding. You can have different champions wrestle on different cards. Well, September 22nd, 1980, in Madison Square Garden, this will be the third ever Super Bowl of wrestling and the second one between WWF champion Bob Backlund and the NWA champion Harley Race. But this is the first time the Super Bowl of wrestling took place in a WWF arena, where the WWF champion Bob Backlund would defeat the NWA champion Harley Race by disqualification when Harley Race, caught in a Bob Backlund sleeper hold, would throw the referee into Bob Backlund, causing a disqualification. On that same card, the rematch of the Showdown in Shea, Andre the Giant took on Hulk Hogan. And once again, Hulk Hogan body slammed Andre the Giant. just like he did a month earlier in Shea Stadium. Andre, however, would pick up the win due to a fast count by the special guest referee, Gorilla Monsoon. So Andre and Hogan was on the undercard of Bob Backlund versus Harley Race, WWF champion versus NWA champion.
How the times have changed.
They have indeed. Exactly 4 years later, September 22nd, 1984, back to Madison Square Garden for another first, Dan. Jesse Ventura was supposed to take on Hulk Hogan, but Jesse had been sidelined with some chest issues and respiratory infection, and which we now know would be the end of his wrestling career.
Yeah.
So substituting for Jesse Ventura this date, September 22nd, 1984, would be Big John Studd, and he would defeat Hulk Hogan by countout. But the big story, Daniel,
but the big story on Action News
was Big John Studd's manager for that particular match, because his manager making his WWF debut September 22nd, 1984 in Madison Square Garden would be Bobby the Brain Heenan. And Heenan was supposed to be Jesse Ventura's manager. Not that he needed one, but
yeah. The rest they say is history.
Is history, yes. But Bobby Heenan made his WWF debut September 22nd, 1984 in the corner of John Studd. September 22nd, 1996, coming back to Philly, one of the most memorable cards ever held in Philly. Now, I've mentioned Tri-State Wrestling Alliance right here in Philly, and I mentioned my first wrestling match ever right here in Philly, but September 22nd, 1996 was WWE's pay-per-view In Your House Mind Games right here in Philly. Things got off with a bang. Savio Vega defeated Justin Bradshaw. This is pre-JBL in a Caribbean strap match. But during the match, coming to ringside would be Tommy Dreamer, the Sandman, Taz, Perry Saturn, and Paul Heyman. And when the match went outside the ring, the Sandman would spit beer at Justin Bradshaw, pre-JBL, and that would start a fight. And because ECW was in the house, it really looked real, and to the point where Savio Vega and Justin Bradshaw, who were just fighting each other, teamed up to go up against to fight off Tommy Dreamer, Sandman, and Taz and Perry Saturn. But that was the beginning of the ECW WWE partnership. That same card, Jose Lothario would defeat Jim Cornette in Jim Cornette's first, last, and only wrestling match in Philadelphia. Jim Cornette has a long storied, lots of great memories here in Philly. One of them I mentioned last week when the Midnight Express defeated Tully and Arn for the United States, for the NWA Tag Team Championship, but his only wrestling match, was against Jose Lothario. Also making his WWE wrestling pay-per-view debut, Mark Henry would defeat Jerry Lawler in his first match ever. And Shawn Michaels, the WWE Heavyweight Champion, would defeat Mankind. And this will be the first time, and the first of many, that Mankind would go through a table, or that anyone would go through a table. It started right there at Mind Games in Philly. And now we see people going through tables, but this was the most peculiar one because Mankind went head first through a table, so we just saw the bottom of his butt and his legs hanging out of the table. But first of many consecutive times where that table would be broken in WWF pay-per-views, but it started right here in Philly. WWE In Your House Mind Games, 1996. Exactly 1 year later, in 1997, September 22nd, 1997, we go back to Madison Square Garden in a street fight versus Triple H. Dude Love would take on Triple H. Mankind would take on Triple H. But making his WWF debut the first time would be Cactus Jack, who would earn the win over Triple H. Speaking of debuts, Dan, on that same day, September 22nd, 1997, while Cactus Jack was debuting in Madison Square Garden, debuting in Salt Lake City, that same day in WCW, defeating Hugh Morris in under 2 minutes, would be the one and future king, Bill Goldberg.
I find it, what makes me laugh about that match in particular is that the big deal was the backflip he did.
Yeah.
Larry Zbyszko was like, whoa!
Never seen a wrestler do a backflip before.
I can't believe I saw that. Hugh Morris is, that's one. Yeah.
The classic, but that was the beginning of the streak of Goldberg. That would be his first WWE match.
I absolutely, unapologetically, unequivocally agree with Bobby the Brain Heenan. Who cares if he goes 1,000-0? Who cares? Never beat him. As soon as you beat him, you were done. You put the streak on him, and then you beat him in that way, and you killed it. You literally killed it. And it's really, you could talk about, I mean, I didn't even get into that. The reactions he was getting compared to Austin were phenomenal. And people were talking about where they're piping in chances. He was still over. You could hear the crowd reacting on TV. And it really started to change once they did that match at Starrcade. It was over. And I see Nash's logic in you need to create a heel faction to go against him again to start the cycle over. You didn't have to beat him in that way. And this will just get filed under Dan WCW's dead, I know, but it is fun to speculate. They shouldn't have ever beaten him. Bobby's absolutely right. They shouldn't have beat him. Yeah, it's crazy that he still is over too.
Well, Bobby had a lot of theories about Goldberg and how WCW dropped the ball on it on Goldberg. They filmed a whole segment where when WCW went to St. Louis and Goldberg dropped by the St. Louis Cardinals and Mark McGuire was rubbing his bat on Goldberg, and then Mark McGuire had 2 home runs that night and went on to hit 70 home runs. Obviously, we know that that record is not something to be proud of, but at the time, Mark McGuire was the biggest thing in baseball and the biggest thing in sports, and having him be associated with Goldberg would have been huge. ER, the #1 show on television, back when people watched television before cable and in the internet, wanted Goldberg to play himself in an episode of ER. Again, the #1 show on television. WCW said no, so they grabbed some actor and called him who looked exactly like Goldberg, and the show was still #1 that week, but imagine if Goldberg had played himself on the #1 show on television and what that would have done for WCW. Or even the fact that David Arquette started hanging out at ringside with his wife, Courtney Cox, who was the star of Friends, that was also the #1 show on TV. Imagine putting Courtney Cox on your TV show, interviewing her, saying, "Hey, Courtney, isn't this the place to be, WCW, since you're on Friends, the #1 show on television?" She could say, "Yes, WCW is the place to be." Wouldn't that have been something to do, maybe? But no.
Kurt Russell was there, and they did a 30-second spot. They didn't announce it. There was no announcement they were there. There was nothing. And they had literal superstars on their television show live. And it was a 30-second spot that you did nothing with. That's just stupid.
Yeah. There was a
Sorry.
That's okay. There was a quarterback. I forget his name. Or college. He played the Senior Bowl. He went on to be pro, and he asked permission for Eric Bischoff. Could he wear an NWO shirt? And Eric said no. And the guy turned out you won the MVP of the Senior Bowl, and he was on camera for like a whole 5 minutes. He could have been on camera on the national championship wearing an NWO shirt, but Eric Bischoff said no. So again, so many opportunities lost. Speaking of lost, and it was found, even though it should have been lost. September 23rd, 1977 was one of the most interesting matches that's ever occurred. It's on the WWE network, and I think it was on a couple of WWE DVDs. But on September 23rd, 1977, in a driving rain in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Andre the Giant went up against Gorilla Monsoon in a boxing match.
Huh.
Have you seen it? You've seen it, right?
No.
You never saw the Andre the Giant Gorilla Monsoon boxing match?
No.
Oh my God. Now Gorilla Monsoon was a big deal in Puerto Rico. And this was right before Gorilla went up against Muhammad Ali in that prompted the Ali Antonio Inoki fight. But Andre went up against Gorilla in a boxing match, and it was refereed by former heavyweight boxing champion Jersey Joe Walcott, and it was in a driving rain. Some would even call that storm, Dan, a Gorilla Monsoon. But like you said about Joe Goodhart, do yourself a favor. If you have not seen the Andre the Giant versus Gorilla Monsoon boxing match, watch it. And it's on one collection because Lord Alfred Hayes was actually doing commentary on one of them because it was like found footage. That same date, as memorable as that match was for the wrong reasons, Andre versus Gorilla Monsoon in the boxing match on September 23rd, 1977. 10 years later, September 23rd, 1987, is a memorable match for all the right reasons. This was taped in Richfield Coliseum, I believe. But September 23rd, 1987 was a Saturday night's main event, which featured Macho Man Randy Savage going up against the Intercontinental Champion, the Honky Tonk Man. That prompted interference by the Hart Foundation.
The
Honky Tonk Man. The infamous guitar shot heard around the world.
Yeah.
Miss Elizabeth being shoved to the ground, kind of stiff by Honky Tonk Man. All of Jimmy Hart's stable in the ring, the Hart Foundation, and the World Tag Team Champions and Intercontinental Champion in there. Miss Elizabeth running back to the dressing room, bringing out Hulk Hogan, and for a brief moment, all four champions in the ring at the same time. First time Hogan and Bret Hart got to trade blows, and the start of the Hulk Hogan Randy Savage team. But all that happened September 23rd, 1987. That match wouldn't air until October 3rd, and when it did air, Dan, on Saturday night's main event on NBC, it got a 9.7 rating.
That's insane. A 9.7. I'm not going to nitpick, but something that always made me chuckle with Hulk Hogan's incredible acting was that she runs back there, and so presumably she pulls him all the way from the locker room out to the ring to help Macho Man, and he does not understand English words. Macho Man needs your help. And he looks surprised until he finally turns around halfway out the entrance ramp and just starts going, he starts doing the breathing. Like, you didn't understand what Macho Man need help. Hogan, help. It's just
And the thing was, when she went running back to the dressing room, fans were yelling at her, go get Hogan, get Hogan, get Hogan.
and oh, you need oh, he needs me. I didn't understand you. You're a woman. I don't speak the same language. It's just I'm kidding about that part. It just always makes me laugh because it's such a great moment. I'm doing tongue in cheek, making fun of it. It's iconic, but that always made me laugh where it was like, oh yeah, he got it.
Yeah, and they kind of alluded to it. Vince McMahon on the commentary, though, kind of like he had no idea who he was helping. He just saw Honky Tonk, the Heart Foundation, beating up on someone, so he just ran out to help, not knowing that it was Randy Savage.
Thanks, Terry.
Yep. But yeah, that memorable event, that turned Randy Savage face, that started the team of Hogan and Randy Savage, and paved the way for Randy Savage to win his first world championship. Started right there, September 23rd, 1987, on that Saturday night's main event. Another auspicious debut, one that kind of went under the radar, but still very, very huge in terms of professional wrestling. September 23rd, 1995, was the ECW debut of superstar Steve Austin.
Oh.
After the match, after the ECW TV went off the air, Joey Styles was talking to somebody, and then he looked over his shoulder, and there's a guy wearing a Hulk Hogan shirt, flexing, and it's got a do-rag on. And who is that? Is that Steve Austin? And we see Steve Austin doing his Hulk Hogan imitation.
Brother, that's where you're wrong.
Call himself the Stevester. Had his T-shirt said Stevester on it.
Steve-a-mania.
Steve-a-mania. That's right.
Brother Rhyme.
And this is where the big boys play with each other, brother.
Monday NyQuil.
Monday NyQuil, yeah, because the WCW's tagline was, "This is where the big boys play." And Steve took it a step further. This is where the big boys play with each other. But that was his ECW debut, and that was the first inkling we saw of the Steve Austin we will all come to know and love. Paul Heyman, who had managed Steve Austin in WCW, he was part of the Dangerous Alliance, who knew what a great wrestler, what a great talent he was. Also knew that he was squeezed out, just like I said a week earlier in last week's Historian, after he lost the United States Championship to one of Hogan's buddies, Hacksaw Duggan, in less than 30 seconds, and where he was not given a fair shot and unceremoniously let go by WCW after an injury. Paul Lee gave him carte blanche. He said, "Steve, would say whatever's on your mind, man, and just go with it." He did, and the Steve Austin interviews, the Steve Austin in ECW became the Steve Austin we know and love now, and it started right there with him not being under anyone's control, not being under anyone's directive, not being given any script or being told what to say. This was Steve Austin being able to be Steve Austin, and it started at his debut in ECW. I always said ECW has launched a lot of great talent. A lot of people got their first big breaks on ECW, or a lot of even established stars. The first time any American audiences had ever seen them was on ECW, like Rey Mysterio, Psychosis, Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko. But I always put Steve Austin in there too, with getting their start, quote unquote, at ECW, because Had Steve Austin not gone to ECW, had he not been given carte blanche by Paul Heyman, we wouldn't have the Steve Austin we see now.
Nope.
But it started September 23rd, 1995. Heading up to today, and today in pro wrestling history, 1975, and back to Madison Square Garden. The formula in Madison Square Garden with championship matches, especially with Bob Backlund, he would wrestle somebody for the first time. Backlund would lose, get counted out, and then he'd come back the next month for another match, kind of blow it off, and if possible, maybe a third match. So first match, Backlund loses. Second match, maybe double disqualification. Third match, Texas Death, 1 hour time limit, cage match, something. But with Bob Backlund's feud with Pat Patterson, it would be 4 months in a row where there was no winner. So this was the blow-off steel cage match that Bill Apter's Inside Wrestling magazine featured on the cover and called it the most ferocious cage match in history. Well, Bob Backlund finally defeated Pat Patterson after 4 months. The fourth straight time they wrestled in Madison Square Garden, and he would defeat Pat Patterson in a steel cage match in 17 minutes. But still, Bob Backlund had never pinned Pat Patterson. Every challenger that Bob Backlund went up against, he defeated. But Pat Patterson, he never did, except in a cage match, but he never pinned him. Also, 35 years ago today, Greg Valentine defeated Tito Santana for the Intercontinental Championship in London, Ontario. This would start off one of the most unheralded feuds in wrestling, but Greg Valentine and Tito Santana would fight each other from now until July 7th when Tito regained it. But they had a feud for nearly a year in every state of the union and every single house show that there could, in tag team matches and other one-on-one matches and non-title matches. But the Greg Valentine Tito Santana feud really doesn't get a lot of press when it comes to the great feuds, but they went at each other for almost a year. But it started when Greg Valentine defeated Tito to become Intercontinental Champion 35 years ago today. September 24th, 2000, today, 19 years ago today, right here in Philly. We're back to Philly, Dan. WWF Unforgiven pay-per-view at the FU Center. Exactly when it was named then. Best match of the night was probably Chris Jericho versus X-Pac. But I'll always remember the cage match. The Hardy Boys defeated Edge and Christian for the WWF Tag Team Championship in a cage. This was one of those cards that the Philadelphia crowd became famous for. The heels were cheered, the faces were booed, but Hardy Boys and Edge and Christian are the only ones that really got a rise out of the crowd. And finally, on this date in pro wrestling history, we talked about auspicious debuts. Talked about Steve Austin in ECW. Well, on this date, 2006, it was the TNA debut of the Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle, which was a huge shock to the system.
I remember not hearing much about that because I remember he was on the cover of one of the WWE magazines that month before, and it was announced he was getting put down to ECW and he was going to be the face of ECW, and not knowing the issues going on backstage, I'm like, well, that's a good fit, man. He'll be great there in the mat wrestling, and they're going to do the ECW thing, and blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden he was on Impact. I was like, oh, right then. That was over. But that was one of the first ones in a long time since WCW shutting down that it was like, whoa, oh, this got serious.
Yeah, and the thing was, Dan, I mean, the Dudley Boys were already there, and that was a big deal. But seeing Kurt Angle, that was a huge shock because, like you said,
sorry, go ahead, finish.
no, I didn't see that happening at all.
Not that it wasn't a big deal for the Dudley Boys, but the Dudley Boys were ECW guys. Like, when I think of the Dudley Boys, I still think ECW, even though they had a hell of a run in WWE and Impact. They're still ECW guys, right? So when they went to WWE and they went to Impact, it was a big deal in that way, but it wasn't like, whoa, they jumped ship. This was a WWE, WWF guy going like Macho Man going to WCW, Hogan going to WCW. It was like, holy Jesus, this is serious.
It is serious. Yeah, I said the exact same thing, and it was a huge shock. And like even his tagline, "It's real, it's damn real," because I didn't think it was. But yeah. So that was the debut of TNA debut of Kurt Angle, September 24th, 2006, and that, my friends and ladies, is called The Wrestling Historian.
And that was a damn good wrestling historian. And I think we can end on that note this week. I think it's time to go. Children, it's time to put the books away and go to sleep. Adults, it's time to have sex with your significant other, male or female. Have a little fun. And before you do that, let Craig tell you where you can follow. Not he can follow you, because that's creepy. Where you can follow him on Twitter and social media, and the other podcasts that he does. Craig, where is that stuff?
That stuff is, well, see, you have to follow me first before I can follow you.
Yes, exactly. Not the other way around. Yeah. You're a stalker if you do that.
Yes. If you're doing it right, you are. You can follow me, Craig Lagans, if you so choose, on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter at Craig Lagans, CraigLiggeons. Happy birthday, Gritty.
Happy birthday, Gritty.
And my other podcast is called Comic Book Gurus, if you're into that comic book stuff that all the kids seem to be into nowadays. And you can follow me on Comic Book Gurus at Twitter at Comic Book Gurus, and it's available on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and wherever podcasts are sold for free.
Follow me. I'll forget that line's coming. It still makes you laugh. Follow me on all social media platforms at Dan93, the HIAC Talk Radio Network, featuring Obey the Pucks, new episode, Stadium Journey, and the Wrestling Podcast, which is probably going to be renamed soon. Maybe, I don't know. At all social media platforms, HIAC Talk Radio, the VOC Radio Network, VOC Nation. It's the second show I've done that. Said it wrong. VOC Nation Radio Network. Search it on iTunes to listen on iTunes for all our episodes. I am, as I said on Obey the Puck, I'm going to work on getting our own iTunes and Google Play and Stitcher and all that, those channels back up and running so I can get our episode. I'm not going to leave VOC, and I'm very appreciative, but we need our own channel. People are asking for it. Enough people have asked me about it where I want to bring it back, so we're going to work on that. But keep track of all that stuff. Just search HIAC Talk Radio. For Greg Lagans, I'm the above average comedian, Dan Calchico. We'll see you next week. Have a good one.